Hello, hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, Not All Talk by Praan Foundation. It's that time of the year again when a lot of students are preparing for their exams and in schools and colleges. It's that time when students are, like putting together all their efforts and, they're coming together to answer their exams. And definitely, exams is a time of primary stress in a lot of students. So we have with us one of my very dear friends, also my batchmate here, Afshan. And today we're going to be speaking about exam stress and students. So before we get into the conversation, I'm going to take a minute to introduce Afshan. Afshan has completed a master's in psychology with a specialization in counseling psychology from St. Francis College. She's been in Oman for over the last 4 years, and she's a high school senior counselor there, and she does work with a lot of students. Now, Afshan basically believes that it's very important to work on children's or students' social, emotional, and behavioral needs, and that early intervention is very important because young minds are highly impressionable. And with that, hi Afshan, how are you doing?
Hi, Aliza. It's so good to be here with you and the Praan Foundation, right from Gulf.
It's really good to have you too, and I mean, I'm sure it's really difficult. I mean, with the school schedule, I know with the child at home, I'm sure it's been very difficult. And just before we begin, I really want to thank you for being able to do this.
It's my pleasure. The virtual reality has made it all possible now
I
to
know.
be anywhere, anytime.
I know. Okay, great. So, Afshan, you know what? Without making our audiences wait a lot, I would just want to jump into, the gamut of questions that we have laid out for you today. So, to start off with, quite many a times, parents might look at students as making excuses during exams to not want to study. And because of this, I believe so that stress must or might, it goes a little unnoticed. So, do you believe that stress among students during exams is real, or do you think that it's just an excuse?
That's a very good question, and I think there's a lot of contradiction that happens around this topic about stress. If stress is real, or it's just a made-up excuse for students to just, be lazy and not study around. But definitely, I think exams are really challenging for students, and especially with these fluctuations because of COVID and the pandemic.
Right.
Virtual, then online, then offline. It is causing more stress to students, and definitely stress is physiological and psychological, and it's proven, it's research based. But the students need to understand that there's a thin line. I mean, there's good stress and there's bad stress, and there's a very thin line between it. Of course, without any stress, a student wouldn't perform at all. But with a little stress, with the optimal stress, definitely there would be motivation to perform. But there's a very thin line, like I said, and when that optimal stress crosses that line, then comes the nervousness, the anxiety, the stress, and fear, which would definitely hamper the student's performance, the memory. And yes, but most parents might take it as an excuse, but as a parent, as a significant person in the child's life, you need to identify if the student is really stressed and help him with all the resources that you can.
I think I think you've absolutely made it clear to us that it is research based, and it is found that stress during exams does exist. Yes, the use stress at the optimal level makes it very, very good. But when it moves to distress or distress, that is when the problem is. So thank you so much for actually, giving us clarity about this myth regarding exams. I think a lot of us have always felt, and like if I trace it back to my childhood also, I do know some of my classmates who would, like walk in with a lot of like a heavy heart into the exams because nobody would be able to understand what's happening. So thank you so much for that. Moving ahead, now that we know that stress exists, and we also know that there is a lacuna, there is a lag that stress has, but I think it goes unidentified. So could you, help us with some signs or, some ways in which we can identify, these stress symptoms when exams are around?
Right. So, here I would like to divide the stress responses probably in three areas. There could be emotional and behavioral and cognitive changes. Now, when it comes to the basic physiological, lack of sleep, the student is unable to sleep or probably sleeping a lot. And when it comes to eating, probably the student's appetite is completely reduced, or probably the student is eating a lot, the stress eating, which you call. And there would be withdrawal. The students wouldn't want to talk to anyone. They just would isolate themselves to their rooms. And and cognitively, here where the actual problem comes in. Because the cognitive response to stress would be difficulty in remembering information. So probably how much ever time they must have put in the study and the revisions, but because of stress, they might not be able to retain that information. And most students complain that they just go blank
Yeah.
when in exam, and this is really frustrating for them. So poor concentration, and then memory problems, and all these things might give you a clear idea that yes, the student is probably experiencing some stress.
I think, in addition to what you've also said, this excessive fear that comes into them, that does impact their general behavior also. So, children do, or students do, make it obvious. I think, like you've said, what we need to do is we need to be able to read these signs. And the symptoms and signs that you've said are, very, very apparent. I would just like to add one more to the list that I have seen in a lot of students because of this excessive fear and the anxiety that is there to it, right? They tend to push it off. Like we usually see that students would like push it till the last minute to study. That, maybe, like I'll start a day earlier, and then it goes to like, 5 hours before the exam, 4 hours before the exam, 2 hours, and, just like looking at the notes before getting into the exam. This sort of behavior, which in this particular case, I wouldn't call procrastination, but I would call like putting off. I think this also happens because of the fear and anxiety of not wanting to face it. So, this is a very, very clear thing that is seen generally in the student population. But I think we need to
Definitely.
understand that. Thank you
Definitely.
so
And
much. Hmm.
to add up to that point, I think, like you mentioned, yes, they do procrastinate, and that's because of the lack of proper organization.
Yeah,
Now, there's so much to take up, and they don't have a way to organize it, so they tend to just delay it, and it would be like, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. And it gets too much for the tomorrow to take up the entire thing, and then, of course, the stress.
absolutely. So, now I want to move in a place where, I want the audiences to understand as to, what they can do as family, as community, or as the counselor. How can we support these children? But even before I venture into that set of questions, I wanted to bring out to the audiences that between 2015 and 2019, the National Crimes Record Bureau has shared statistics that because of examination stress, anxiety, and mostly because of failure in examination, about 48,573 student suicides have been registered. This is an alarming increase, and it's only increasing with the years. I believe that from the previous 4 years to 2015, roughly 20% increase in this, entire rate of suicides has been noticed, which is very saddening. But I think this happens to a great extent because they're experiencing something and there is nobody to support them or understand what's happening. So, one of the closest set that these students have is the family. So, how do you think the family can help the child de stress or, prepare better for the examinations?
True. That's really saddening. The statistics which you have put up, and that's definitely because of lack of awareness, lack of awareness of resources that is around, and there's a lot of stigma and taboo about counseling and mental health and taking help, and that's where it all comes down to. So, as the most significant people in the student's life, the immediate help that parents can provide is talk, right? Just talk to them, observe the signs. Most of the students, they tend to keep everything to themselves, and as parents, they feel that they are liable to know everything that's happening in their child's life. But you should keep an open mind that probably if your child is not comfortable in opening up to you, connect him to someone, connect him or her to someone whom they feel comfortable in opening up to. Not really a counselor, but a close friend, a close family member. So give them that platform to vent out, talk to them, and ensure that they have all the basic essentials sorted, that they are getting enough sleep, good nutrition, and assure them, give them positive assurance that whatever happens, whether you score low or score high, you are going to remain the special person you are. And just breaking that myth that marks will define your future or the person you are. I think that's where it comes down to. So assuring the child that no matter what, your grades will not define you as a person. You are a lot more than that. Will definitely help them give the confidence and motivation to perform better.
I mean, you were just talking about how they need a place to vent out to, and how they need somebody they can speak with, who might not necessarily be a counselor because they're just looking to vent out. Very subtly, but not subtly so. I wanted to actually take this minute to speak about first responders. So I don't think we've had the opportunity to speak about this, but at Praan we have this program which is called the First Responders Program. So these are people from different walks of life, okay, and these guys come forward to get trained in emotional first aid response. So maybe for those who are listening to this, if you know about a first responder, or an emotional first aid responder, or a psychological first aid responder, reach out to them. They are trained to listen and to help you, maybe to support you when you're feeling this way. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I really, really want to add to this particular point that, to a great extent, I think as parents, we might tend to pressurize the child, and काफ़ी सारी बार क्या हो जाता है, I believe it's also very unknowingly. So we look at it as motivation, but maybe what we might be doing is, we might be pushing the child into feeling more pressurized. For example, it's a very simple example. When you give a statement that you've studied so well, I'm sure you'll score very well in the examination. That itself is actually a very pressurizing statement. So unknowingly also, we tend to like pressurize children. And I
The
think
statements you use definitely matter a lot. And yes, you're definitely right. And the program which you spoke about, the first responders, the Praan Foundation has come up with, I think it's the dire need of the society right now. And it's really amazing.
Thank you. We'll actually talk about it a little more, maybe a little later. So, having have spoken about the first immediate step, which is the family, I now wanted to move on to the school system and the community in general. What do you think the school system or the community can do for students?
I think working in a school environment for past 4 years, and I feel that the schools need to normalize examinations and stop pressurizing students and stop dividing them into low achievers or high achievers, and break all these myths about merit based promotions. Of course, that's important, but this is really going to put down these low achievers and not motivate them in any way. So I think what's important is inculcating the idea of holistic education. It's not just your marks, but your entire personality, your extracurriculars, how you behave, how you participate, and how you are growing as an individual. That should matter, and not only your marks. And the comparisons made, with their peers and all these things, I think they should be cut down. And this is the root level where we need to work at.
Right.
And I think that's where the schools can really work in creating awareness. Nowadays we have counselors in every school, and they need to have these awareness programs of what is stress and how the students can deal with stress, not just exam stress, but stress in general. I think this is where the schools can definitely target this area.
Yeah, I think it's high time that schools do shift their focus. I don't know of a lot of schools who have, these classes where they're talking about, generalizing and, normalizing a lot of things. But these schools are like, I can count them on the tips of my fingers. I think that most of the schools, and actually almost every school, should pick up this model where, stress is something that is real, it is spoken about, and we take it forward that way. Having have said this, I also want to ask you that uh, there is a lot of hesitation when we ask somebody, like a student for that matter, to come out and seek therapy. I know in your previous answers, even when we spoke about the family, you did mention that they should go out and they should seek help. When we spoke about the community or the entire school system itself, you did emphasize on the need of a counselor. So I wanted you to spend some time on explaining to us if therapy is actually useful for children. And this could be not only in exams but in general, So, how does therapy really affect a child?
All right. So, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of stigma around mental health and counseling and therapy. So, people mostly have this myth that therapy is about, it's something serious. Only mentally ill people or, students with special needs can approach a counselor. And, it involves medications and, because that's an inability to understand a difference between a psychiatrist and a
Yeah.
psychologist, right? And they should understand that therapy is more about talking and opening up and having a professional in this area being trained. And it is better that a professional understands what the actual underlying issue is behind the stress, because there might be many underlying causes, why the child has come up to this stage and why the child is experiencing these difficult emotions. So it's definitely very important for a professional to take a lead on this, and a trained therapist can only make a complete assessment of why and how the child is feeling and decide an approach to intervene in this area.
I'm sure. I mean, when you talk about other underlying causes, I think school is the time where children spend about 70% of their life, of their day's time, and their growing years literally. So all the changes that come in a child, even like when they hit puberty, they're in school at that time. So like having have had experience in the school system or the college system, like for example, when they're trying out to when they're understanding relationships, or when they're trying to take decisions about life. I think these are the places where counselors are very, 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 very helpful. Anything about how the pandemic has affected your role as a counselor in school?
Definitely, pandemic. Although it has been a blessing in disguise because we were able to connect with more students virtually, but that physical touch is lost. Wherein the students feel more comfortable around you, and with virtual, with everything being virtual, students tend to take therapy for granted. Sometimes they turn up for sessions, sometimes they're not, and as counselors we go for class observations and see how the students are doing, which probably was a task during these times in pandemic. But I guess during the pandemic, more than students, the parents also required some intervention, because having this the complete changed setting, having children all around, at your home, we all need our space. And parents especially, even they required a lot of intervention in this area, and we have been working collaboratively with the parents, with the teachers and the students to help them accept this new normal, what you call.
I mean, along with the parents, I'm sure that the teachers have also required a lot of intervention this
Definitely.
year, because I know a lot of teachers who had to go in for therapy, because as a teacher, I do understand that the work is immense. Like for most of us, when we switch off our systems and we probably go home, our work is done. But I do understand that teachers, they carry back corrections and they carry back some entering of marks, or for the younger ones, you're like making craft at home and you're busy all the time. So with teachers, I'm sure, I mean, and of course you come from the school setting, it's been so much more difficult. So I have actually this year also seen a lot of teachers approach a lot of therapists. One thing that another thing that I think has happened as a blessing in disguise is that when you walk into the counselor's room in a physical setup, it's a little difficult for students to take the first step. I so believe that now that it is virtual, I was also like having a word with some other counselors. I believe that now that it is virtual, children are a little more, I wouldn't say absolutely, but they find it a little more comfortable because they don't have to physically go somewhere. So, like you said, it is a blessing in disguise, and it has, and I really want to congratulate you on the amazing work of the collaborative effort that you guys are putting forward. Having said this, so I just want to bring you back. So, we spoke about the first responders program, right? So, of the first responders program is a group of individuals, and we have a good of 200 or 240 or plus individuals working with us right now. So, these are people from different walks of life. So, we have engineers, and we have advocates, and we have people working in MNCs. We have life coaches, students, of course, from a great number with us. Now, some of them themselves are approaching exams. While this particular month, our first responders are going to be reaching out to the community, and they're going to be helping uh, you know uh, students who are approaching exams. So, what would your message be for them, those approaching and those helping out or supporting?
From what I have learned about the program, it does lay a great emphasis on observing and taking care of self, and this is a very great place to start off. As a student, observe if you're feeling extremely anxious and if you're getting worried. Watch out for the signs of stress, and indulge in self-care. Self-care is the most important, and self-care is not being selfish. Self-care is not putting others' needs, at a backdrop. It's very important because once you start taking care of yourself, only then you'll be in a position to take care of others around you. So organize your work, and it's not just for the students, like you mentioned, teachers. With everything shifting to virtual, there's no boundary between work and home. It's work, work, work the entire day. So it's organize your work and reach out, be it a parent, a student, or a teacher. Reach out about the excessive anxiety or any nervousness that you have been facing, and yes, and for those who are helping students in the community, like your program of first responders, I think it's a really great initiative, and this is what most students need at this time, to vent, and this is such a beautiful opportunity to empower, everyone during these times of distress. So yes, I'm just really proud to be a part of it and be addressing this with the Praan Foundation.
Thank you so much, Afshan, for giving us your time. In this entire session, I wouldn't call it so much, but this entire duration of having have spoken with you, I think quite a lot of myths that actually existed have kind of shattered. That it's not an excuse, and that it exists, and we need to reach out to them, and know what we're doing knowingly and unknowingly. These are two very different but similar things. So, thank you so much for giving us your time, for sharing your thoughts with us. I know I had a word with you, and you told me that you've been doing a lot of the webinars for exams. So, all the best with your upcoming webinars, and thank you so much for giving us your time. Uh, Also, thank you everybody who's joined us to watch this webinar. We'll definitely come back soon next week, where the counselors at Praan Foundation will answer questions that you have with regards to exams. So if you we actually Afshan has made a great effort to answer most of them. But if you still think that you have questions and you want answers for them, do reach out to us on all our social media handles. Send in your questions, and we will soon be there to answer them. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us in.
Thank you.